Good evening. We'll start slowly with a little meditation because we're just a small group of us tonight, and I won't give as extensive meditation as we've done on the weekends. So if you're interested, you can come on the weekend and learn how to control the mind. Right now, let's just try to calm our minds. You can do that by sitting with your spine straight, your eyes slightly closed. It's good to keep them slightly open so you don't become drowsy. And pay attention, or put your mindfulness to the breathing, to the respiration, without controlling it. Recognizing when you're breathing in and breathing out. Use that as your touchstone, so to speak, and let every other thought, disappear. Just don't pay attention to the other thoughts. Watch the whole sequence as it's coming in, it's getting closer to the end of the inhalation. Just churning around direction, becoming exhalation, thinking like that. You'll notice yourself going back to thoughts. You'll sort of sometimes so dramatically that you forget whether you're breathing in or breathing out. Your breathing might still continue. So when that happens, bring your attention back to the breathing. Deprive the thoughts of their what sustains them, which is attention. If you don't pay attention to them, they begin to disappear. And just invest that energy back into watching the breathing. See if you can discern the exact point where the breath changes direction, from coming in to going out, from going out to coming in again. So as not to lose the continuity of your awareness of the breathing through the whole cycle. if you have some tension in your body or some pains, for 1 or 2 respirations, imagine breathing in white, healing light along with the air that fills your body. And as you breathe out the black energy that is within your body, causing some pain or tension or irritation. So with the mind slightly calmed, try to make a motivation for the next, whatever we have left, hour and a half or whatever. I think I'm going to participate this evening not simply as an exercise to obtain knowledge that might make me seem clever this lifetime or whatever, but as a means of healing myself in a fundamental way, to develop deep wisdom and compassion, so that I will be less a problem for others in the world. You may not consider yourself you're a problem for others, but often we are. And that we can actually eventually benefit them with authentic concern, love, compassion, born out of wisdom. So the material that will be taught are the teachings of the Buddha. I think I'm going to be listening to this in order to reach my highest spiritual state for the welfare of others. And then relax. Bring your attention back to the present. So, I forgot this gentleman's name. What is it? What's your name?
Scott.
Scott's new. Alice, are you new or are you an old-time student?
This is the first time I came
To this one?
one of these, yeah.
Oh, okay. So welcome to you. Welcome to the old timers. Some of us are older than others. Long white beards. The topic for this evening is a particular text that explained the previous lives of the Buddha. So those kinds of stories that the Buddha himself explained. First of all, you know who Buddha was? Do you know, Alice, who Buddha was?
He was a prince.
Pardon?
He was a prince.
He was a prince at one time, yeah, like that. Again, I'm like, Frank?
Scott.
Scott. How can I remember Scott? Scott Towles. Okay, I have to see.
Sure.
Do you know anything about the life of Buddha? Alice apparently knows he was a prince when he was young.
I know the story of him leaving the palace
Okay.
and discovering age sickness, death, and like sitting under the Bodhi tree.
Okay, good, yeah. So he took the aspect of being an ordinary person. That is not a god or something like that. Whereas from the Buddhist perspective, he was already a highly evolved spiritual being many, many lifetimes in the past. So what does that mean? Buddhism believes in the existence of our consciousness continuity in the future. When we die, although our body does not continue, and our gross mind, this lifetime, the one that you're utilizing now, that thinks I am Rajiv, I am, I am Alice, I am Scott. This time I remember the Taos. That mind disappears at the time of death, the same way that it disappears when we fall asleep. But what continues is a subtlemost mind without any sense of personality. I am this or that. And when it due to its previous actions or karma, past karma, it takes rebirth in one of the various ways that we can take rebirth. That subtlemost mind kind of radiates out, becomes more gross, and has, you might think, oh, I'm a cow, I'm a cockroach. You wouldn't necessarily verbalize that, but you would recognize this is me in your new body. And in the past also, we had a life prior to this one. We weren't necessarily a human, although in some rare cases we were human. Actually, in general, from a Buddhist perspective, it's very rare to be born as a human. We have to create very special karmic causes, which is a reason to look at our present situation and feel not pride, but a certain amount of joy. Wow, I've got a human rebirth that doesn't come very often. Next life I might be in the hell realm, or as a spirit, or even someone more, you might call God realm-like existence, much more pleasurable, but sometimes more pleasure becomes an obstacle to practicing a spiritual path. Have you ever noticed that? Sometimes when things are too good, you kind of get inebriated with that. So, from a Buddhist perspective, the Buddha that we say that lived maybe 2,500 years ago, he wasn't called Buddha from the beginning. He was born as a son of a royal family and a prince, and he very, very, how to say, as a result of his past actions, it was very clear he was a special person. He was very talented. Everything he did, he excelled. And as he went through these various stages of life, he left his home, as you said, and sought spiritual teachings, because he had this sort of insight of seeing examples of death, aging, sickness, and the fourth thing that he saw when he went out. So he saw a dead person being taken to a funeral. He saw sick people. He saw aged people with canes, bent over, hobbling to the shopping center. I was teasing my friend back there. I think he's fallen asleep. No, he hasn't. He's doing his Instagram. What was the fourth thing that he saw? Do you know, Mike? Do you know? He saw a sannyasin, someone who looked like a monk, you might say, with some robes that indicated he was on a spiritual path, giving up the regular worldly life. And then, when he asked his attendant what that was, he said there were some people who were looking for a solution to aging, sickness, and death. how could you get out of this? Because it was understood at the time in India that there was this wheel of life. You would continually be born again and again within this cycle. Maybe as an animal, as a spirit, sometimes occasionally, very, very occasionally as a human, we would fritter that away. So when he achieved the goal of solving this problem, manifested this, which is of the various world religions that we have today, his particular solution was unique to escape from this cycle of constant rebirth. It involved a certain insight into what caused us to take rebirth again and again, a certain basic kind of ignorance that imagines a self-identity. If I ask, like Alice, if I ask you, who are you? What would you say? Like it's just like an interrogation, like in the movie. Who are you?
Human being.
Okay. And I mean, there'd be some people who would start like, I am a student, I am an architect, some kind of thing that their ego identifies with. Human being's pretty good. We have a sense of our own identity. I am Scott, I am Rajiv, I'm Jeff. That seems to be irrefutable, that gets offended if you're insulted, that gets sort of thrill when you're complimented or loved or shown affection. From a Buddhist perspective, that is kind of like a dream. Like a dream is something appears but doesn't exist the way that it appears. Any of you have had a dream last night, by any chance that you remember? Or if did you have? Alice, it looks like you did.
I don't dream at all.
You don't dream at all?
Maybe.
I think you're just dreaming that you don't dream at all. You do dream. But Alice, you seem to be nodding your head. Did you have a dream last night?
I feel like I did, but I can't remember.
Okay. Maybe like Roger, he probably had the dreams, but he doesn't remember them. That's the thing.
I only remember like maybe once a year, twice a year.
On your birthday. So the Buddha had this insight. From a Buddha's perspective, actually he was already enlightened eons ago. He'd come to the world particularly to show this aspect of following a spiritual path in order to lead others, to institute the teachings in the world, what they say, turning the wheel of Dharma, giving the spiritual teachings. So during those teachings, at various times, topics would come up. People would ask, why is this happening? Why did that person have that rebirth and so forth? And he would tell stories of the past lives of these people, and that would, the karma that they created, the actions they created in those lifetimes, that might be ripening later in certain consequences. In particular, he gave particular stories about his own life while he was evolving to become a Buddha, when he was still on the spiritual path as a bodhisattva, someone who was aiming to become a Buddha. Have you heard that word before? Bodhisattva? Yeah, it's kind of it, a little bit. So difference, a bodhisattva is not necessarily a Buddha. When I say not necessarily, because you could say the Buddha is a bodhisattva, but bodhisattva is someone who's working to achieve that goal, like like a prince, like the son of a king will eventually become a king if he lives, is not assassinated. If he lives longer than his father, he will become king. But he's not called king until he achieves that recognition. So the Buddha gave examples of his past lives as illustrations of how hard it is, how many lifetimes he practiced to to achieve the merit, the good karma to achieve these realizations. So basically all of the Buddhist realizations, the evolution, can be put into two categories. Good heart, compassion, love, and the ultimate good heart is what is called the altruistic mind aiming for enlightenment. We call it bodhicitta. The bodhisattva, the being who is aiming for bodhi, has bodhicitta, the mind of bodhi, mind of enlightenment. That's the ultimate good heart. And the ultimate wisdom, if you have a balance of these things, is the wisdom that realizes the elusive-like nature of everything, not only the self, but all other phenomena, that they appear, but they're devoid of a certain kind of findability and solidity that our minds assume are there. Like in a dream, ordinary person completely believes that dream. It appears real, and you can even be sweating if you imagine you're being chased by a dog, or you can have some kind of incredible, pleasurable experience. Imagine embracing, your boyfriend or girlfriend, or something like that. Or you can even feel satisfaction of eating food. Some of my lamas say that when they were in the monastery, when they didn't have much food at all, and at one night when he dreamed of eating, butter, and he woke up feeling very, very comfortable, except getting some good oil. So, I'm going to read a couple of these and mention. So these are stories. This is from a collection called the Jataka Mala. So the word mala, we had talked about this last weekend, is a word that means garland or rosary. The Tibetans, when they're beads, like the Christians have prayer beads. Either were you Christian? Have you been Christian, or was your family Muslim?
I don't think so.
No? Atheist?
I guess
Don't know.
by
Okay.
default.
Yeah, whatever. Scott, who were your family with?
My mom was very Christian.
Christian, so I don't know, not all Christians have beads. Usually Catholics have prayer beads and stuff. Usually they have 108, the same as Buddhists have 108 beads in their rosary or garland, same word. So this is called the garland of Jatakas. Jataka means life stories of the Buddha. And the person who wrote it was became famous later. He was non-Buddhist at the beginning. He was very smart. He debated with other Buddhists and was eventually came around to realizing the Buddha's teachings were very, very true. And as a way of atoning for his earlier criticism of Buddhism, he wrote many books. And this compendium is one of them. So I'm going to start with one. Where's that here?
Who's the author?
Come again?
Who's the author?
His name is Arya Shura, sorry. And I'll tell him if we ever have time sometime, more story of how he became a Buddhist. Everything quite interesting. Oh, here we go. The Ruru deer. There's a story. So this is a kind of representative of many of the stories. This book you can get, this was published by Dharma Publishing out in California. A very nice translation, well done, and with drawings. I don't know if you can see from that distance. They're line drawings illustrating each of the story. Here's someone on a deer is actually being saved from a river by the deer. So this is the Ruru deer. And the preface says, It is not their own, but others' suffering that the virtuous cannot bear. To the open-hearted, no suffering exists but that of others. Even that, quite profound. It is not their own, but others' suffering. It's not their own suffering, but others' suffering that the virtuous cannot bear. The virtuous mean people who are really good-hearted, like when there's some kind of accident or fire or something. There's some people who just run themselves to get out, right? And there's others who look around to see who might be hurt. Can I help? So it is not their own, but other sufferings the virtuous cannot bear. They can bear their own suffering, no problem. They can't bear the suffering of others. They want to eliminate that. To the open-hearted, no suffering exists but that of others. Isn't that an incredible precept right there for us to think about? Once the Bodhisattva, so in these stories when it refers to the Bodhisattva, he's referring to his previous lives before he achieved Buddhahood on the various levels of development. Once the Bodhisattva lived as a ruru deer in a remote forest, part of a vast wilderness, far from the paths of men. Sometimes even the Bodhisattva was very, very highly evolved. He would take rebirth as an animal sometime, and even in lowly states, in order to help others. So it wasn't like this was like bad karma, bad juju ripening. He was a ruru deer. You'll see, because he was quite an exceptional being. All manner of plants bloom there in glorious abundance. Salas, bakulas, pialas, and there's a whole list of different things. Thickets, tinisas, chamis, and it goes on. Kusha grass, bamboo, and reeds. Goes on for more and more. And everywhere the creeping tendrils of vines veil the outstretched branches of the trees. So there's a beautiful forest with beautiful flowers and plants. A great many forest animals live there as well. The guru, prishata, we don't know what the prishata was, and Srimara deer, three different kinds of deers. Yaks. Do you know what yaks are? You ever heard of yaks? Big, you know?
Like Y-A-K?
Y-A-K, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
So, apparently there were yaks. Elephants, javaya, oxen, buffaloes, and it goes on, antelopes, boars, all sorts of animals, wolves, lions, bears, and many more. But the rarest and most unusual of all the animals was one ruru deer. His color was as brilliant as pure gold. His soft fur was dappled with spots of every color, shining like rubies, sapphires, emeralds, and aquamarines. With his mild blue eyes, incomparably large and bright, with his horns and hooves gleaming like gems, he seemed like a moving treasury of jewels. Knowing his body to be an extremely desirable object, and aware of the pitiless nature of man, the ruru deer frequented only the unknown forest paths. He realized, if he went to where people were, he would be hunted and so forth. His keen intellect led him to avoid places made unsafe by hunters with their traps and nets, their snares and holes covered with twigs and baited with grain. He taught those animals who followed him to avoid such places, also, like him, leading them like a father and a teacher. Would not any creature longing for happiness honor such great beauty combined with such fine intelligence and such wonderful behavior? So, for us also, these kind of teachings, those that have some faith in Buddhism, we can kind of get an understanding. The Buddha, even taking rebirth in these lower realms, did so, always made use of it to benefit others. So if we, in the future, in this lifetime, find ourselves in destitute states, almost like an animal, hunted, maybe feeling sorry for ourselves. we can think of examples like this, that I can still help others that are like me, that are in the same kind of state, leading them. Would not any creature longing for happiness and honor, honor such great beauty combined with such fine intelligence and such wonderful behavior? Now, at one time in that wild part of the forest, the great being, referring to the Ruru deer, the Bodhisattva, heard cries for help from someone who had fallen into a river swollen by the rains. Carried away by the swift current, a man was crying out, "Help me! The river is carrying me off." When I gave one of these courses before, someone said, "You really got into those voices." "There's no one to help me, no boat to save me. Quickly, my arms are so tired, I'm sinking. There's no shallow place. Help me. There's no time to lose." These piteous cries of distress struck the Bodhisattva to the core. He's not an ordinary animal. He's had the imprints of great wisdom, so he can understand human language. It turns out he also talks. As he rushed through the thicket, he called out the comforting words he had used in hundreds of past lives to banish fear, grief, sadness, and fatigue. Even now, living as an animal, he succeeded in saying repeatedly and loudly in a human voice, "Do not be afraid. Don't be afraid." When the deer came out of the forest, he saw the drowning man in the distance, like a precious gift borne along by the river. Isn't it? Like a precious gift. To him, we might think it's like, it's drowning, someone save him. He saw it as an opportunity to do what his heart had opened to doing over so many lives. This was like a gift, an opportunity to help others. As a brave warrior attacks a hostile army, the deer plunged into the swiftly flowing river, the thought of rescue more important than his own life. "Hold fast," he told the man who, overcome by fear and exhaustion, still managed to climb onto the Ruru deer's back. Despite the added weight of his burden and the violence of the current, the deer's extraordinary nobility gave him the strength to reach the riverbank. Once safe on the shore, his pleasure at having saved the man was so great that he felt no weariness. He warmed the man's cold limbs with the warmth of his own body and then pointed the way out of the forest. The extraordinary help the deer had provided, unusual even from the closest of friends, right? Even the closest friends might not dive in to save us. Well, we see examples though in the news sometimes. Usually in the news, the things you hear are so-and-so shot so-and-so and they robbed this place. But every once in a while you hear of some person who dove into the frozen lake to save some child. I'm sure you've seen those. They're so striking like this, that gives inspiration to us. The extraordinary help the deer had provided, unusual even from the closest of friends, touched the man deeply, and the beautiful form of the Ruru deer intensified his admiration and respect. He must have been completely blown away. Also, the deer is talking to him. Bowing his head to the deer, he said, "Neither kin nor childhood friend would have been capable of the action you have just performed for my sake. My life is yours. If it could be used to bring you even some small benefit, I would be deeply honored. Whatever you would have me do, I would do to repay your kindness." It's kind of an Oriental thing, isn't it? Like or is it more Middle Eastern? If you save someone's life, they owe you or something. Anyone ever watched that TV series, The Blacklist? The so-called, the arch, or whatever you call it, the fellow, the main character has one fellow whose life he saved, who's sort of like devoted his life to being his servant after that. The Bodhisattva replied respectfully, "Gratitude is never to be wondered at in the virtuous. as it proceeds from the very nature of the Dharma. Do you know that word, Dharma? So do you know, Alice, Dharma? It's an Indian word. We hear it sometimes in the West. I think there was even a TV series, Dharma and
Greg.
Greg. Dharma and Greg.
Slightly different meaning.
You know what I mean? So dharma is an Indian word. It comes from the root dar, which means to hold up. So there are many, many meanings of dharma. Like your dharma is that which you have to uphold, your responsibility. You have to take care of your parents and so on. Phenomena, things are called dharmas because they can be cognized, they uphold their own identification, sort of sophisticated thing. Dharma could mean also that which you have to uphold to practice a spiritual path. That's called the Sada Dharma, the holy Dharma. So gratitude is never to be wondered at in the virtuous, as it proceeds from the very nature of the Dharma. But nowadays the world is so corrupt. Maybe we're a little more corrupt now, I'm not sure. But nowadays the world is so corrupt that even gratitude is considered a great virtue. Therefore, I ask only one thing. Do not tell anyone about the marvelous animal that rescued you. My beautiful form makes me too desirable a prey. As a rule, people's hearts, filled with greed, have little mercy or self-restraint. And so, take care to guard your own virtue and my life as well. And remember, treachery to friends can never lead to happiness. That's good advice for us too, yeah. I think always, in a nutshell, what advice you can always give kids or people, your friends. Be noble. Take the noble path. Don't mess over your friends. Treachery toward friends can never lead to happiness. Do not be angry because I speak so bluntly. I am but a deer, unskilled in the deceitful human art of diplomacy. Indeed, the clever and talented who feign honesty, pretend to be honest, are precisely those who bring even the sincere under suspicion. So you will make me happy simply by doing as I have asked. So it's not asking any reward. Just don't tell others that you saw me here, so that they're not going to be tempted to come and harm me. The man promised to protect the deer, and after bowing and circumambulating the great being, set out for home. So in ancient India, nowadays I don't think we would do. Are there animals who do that? Like if you've saved a dog, they walk around you or something? I don't know if there's some. Circumambulating is like circle. Ambulate means walk around. It's a practice in holy spots. If you were to walk around the environs, as though you're trying to tie yourself to that place physically. So it now happened that the queen of that country was very endowed with the power of prophetic dreams. She's kind of a psychic. Whatever she dreamt, no matter how extraordinary, always came to pass. And at that time, one morning, about daybreak, she dreamt of the Ruru deer. Sparkling with the brilliance of a heap of jewels, the deer, surrounded by the king and his assembly, stood on the lion throne in her dream, preaching the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, in an articulate and human voice. Fascinated by this vision, her dream, the queen awoke only when the drums were beaten to rouse the king. Like an alarm clock, right? As soon as she could, she ventured to the king's apartments, where the king received her with the honor she deserved as well as with sincere affection. Her bright eyes wide with wonder, her lovely cheeks flushed, her voice trembling from happiness, the queen presented the king with the account of her marvelous dream. "My lord," she said at the end, "please try to find that deer. Its beauty will make your palace as resplendent as the sky, which sparkles with the constellation of the deer." I think there's a in Indian astrology, astrology, there's a constellation called the deer. Somewhere in this kingdom exists a deer with skin of gold, its coat spotted with many colors, shining like hundreds of jewels. This deer is celebrated in the sacred texts, legends, and some have even seen it. Whoever can reveal the whereabouts of that deer to the king will be provided with 14 acres and 10 lovely women. Well, if a woman found, they probably get 10 handsome men. Right? The king knew from experience to trust his wife's visions, partly to please her and partly to satisfy his own desire. He ordered all his huntsmen to search for the Ruru deer, and that proclamation was made. Somewhere in this kingdom exists a deer. Anyone who can reveal the whereabouts of that deer to the king will be provided with 14 acres and 10 lovely women. And the man who had been rescued by the Bodhisattva, remember the one who had been saved from the river, heard this proclamation day after day, again and again. At first, remember, he was so grateful. He was going to really honor his promise to the deer. He was a poor man, much afflicted by the sufferings of poverty, but he was also a mindful man, remembering the great gift he had received from the Ruru deer, the gift of life, being saved. Torn between greed and gratitude, his thoughts swung one direction to the other. What should I do? Follow virtue or fortune? You ever have kind of dilemmas like that? Should I uphold the promise to my benefactor, the deer, rather than the duty to maintain my family? Because he could get, these acres and wealth if he revealed the existence of the deer to the king. Which is more important, the worldly existence or the heavenly one? The here or now. The here or the hereafter. Which code should I follow? That of the pious or that of the worldly? What do you think? Yeah, that's what he should. But what do you think the whole story revolves around he's going to follow, his temptation gets the worst of him. Should I taste glory or the modest joy of the anchorite? Do you know what an anchorite is? Someone who's sort of like an ascetic, someone living a very austere life, I think in Christianity, the people that would beat themselves and things like that. Which is more important, the present time or the time hereafter? Should I strive for riches by revealing it to the king, or the good cherished by the virtuous? At last, his mind, overcome by greed, came to the conclusion, once I have obtained great wealth, I shall be able to honor my kin and my friends, guests and beggars. I will gain not only the pleasures of this world, but also happiness in the other. Because I'll make good actions, I'll give charity and help people. With this resolve, he put out of his mind entirely the gift of the Ruru deer and went to the king. Your Majesty, I know where the Ruru deer dwells. To whom shall I reveal it? The king, full of joy, answered, Friend, you may show him to me. And so the king put on his hunting clothes and left the capital accompanied by a large part of his army, directed by the poor man. They arrived at the river and the forest. The king then encircled the surrounding forest with his forces, and joined by a few resolute and faithful men, the king himself, armed with a bow and arrow, entered the thicket. In a short time, the man caught sight of the Ruru deer, quiet and unsuspecting. He whispered to the king, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, there is the glorious deer. Look and be careful. But as he raised his arm to point out the animal, his hand fell to the ground as if cut off at the wrist with a sword. Nowadays it wouldn't seem possible to us. We don't see things like that. But from the point of view of many spiritual traditions, but Buddhism in particular, sometimes the results of your actions can come even immediately. The karma can ripen right now. What was he, what kind of being was he being disloyal or traitorous to? A bodhisattva, incredible being, who not only was a holy being to begin with, the deer, but had saved his life, and to whom he promised, this thing. His hand falls down. Where was that? Oh yeah. His hand fell to the ground as if cut off at the wrist with a sword. Thus do one's actions, when directed against those honorable ones who perform great deeds, bear immediate fruit, provided there is little to counterbalance them. He didn't have a great accumulation of good conduct to sort of counterbalance this evil deed. So curious was the king to catch a glimpse of the deer, the ruru deer, that he did not notice this strange happening. The hand falls down. The guy is probably, and the king just is looking at the ruru deer, is oblivious to this. Peering into the middle of the forest, which was dark as rain clouds, the king perceived a form shining with the splendor of jewels, brilliant like lightning flashing from the center of a black cloud. Seeing the qualities of the ruru deer and entranced by its beauty, the king resolved to have the deer for himself. Drawing his bowstring, he crept up on the animal to be certain of hitting his target. Doesn't say whether he thinks he's going to kill it. I think he wants to try to bring it back, but it's going to have to injure it to do that. The bodhisattva, however, the ruru deer, hearing the noise of people on every side, already knew that he was surrounded. Seeing the king approach with his arrow ready, he realized there was no escape. In words distinct and articulate, he addressed the king in a human voice. Stop for a moment, mighty prince. Do not shoot me, hero among men. First satisfy my curiosity and tell me, who revealed my home to you, far as it is from familiar paths? Who told you there existed a deer such as myself? Have you ever heard an animal speak in human voice? Maybe only in cartoons or something, right? Or Disney. Probably a lot of Disney things, right? The king, amazed by the human voice coming from the deer. I remember this before, but someone showed me this last week. Amazed, his head is blown away. He turned the point of his arrow toward his. The king, amazed by this human voice coming from the deer, turned the point of his arrow toward his guide. This man, he said, this is the one who revealed your existence. And the bodhisattva, the deer, recognizing the guide, replied, alas, it is easier to pull a tree from a raging river than to save from drowning one who is ungrateful. This is how he returns the favor bestowed upon him. How sad he could not see that this is not the way to benefit himself. The king became serious. What do you mean? Your words alarm me, he said. I do not understand your meaning. On whose account do you speak so roughly? Is it a human or spirit, bird or forest animal? The Bodhisattva said, no. No desire to point blame prompted my sharp words, O king. I spoke in order to prevent your guide from doing such a thing ever again. Who would use harsh language against those who have committed wrong actions? We would, wouldn't we? But who is virtuous, knowing that that person is going to reap the results of their bad actions in the future? Who would make it even worse by saying harsh words? Like, when you know how in ancient times, well, even now maybe in ancient times, if you had a wound and you wanted to torture that person, you'd put salt in their wound and make it even worse. Just that sentence itself gives so many examples how to act for us. When someone harms us in some way and you're tempted to say something to them, it's good teaching for me. To remember they're already created some cause for their future suffering. I'm not going to make it worse. I'd try to develop some compassion. It is like rubbing salt into the wounds of their faults. Yet even to his beloved child, a doctor must apply whatever medicine the illness requires. So sometimes to help the child, to help the person who's sick, you have to do something like say harsh words, not out of anger, out of love. Your guide, the deer continues explaining to the king, your guide was once swept away by the current of the river, and his plight moved me to pity. He whom I rescued has now created this mortal danger to me, O best of men. He refers to the king in this honorific way. Truly is it said that contact with the wicked can never lead to happiness. Again, good reminders that you have friends that are wicked, naughty, and we don't have a word that kind of gets right in there. But in Italian, I say the cattivo, naughty. Truly it is said that contact with the wicked can never lead to happiness. It's good advice to us. The king turned to his guide, and with a look of harsh reproach, he asked, in truth, were you rescued from disaster by this deer? And the man, sweating with fear, pale with misery and despair, answered shamefully, yes, I was. Evil man, cried the king, placing his hand upon his bowstring, he added, do not think this a mere trifle. Anyone whose heart could remain unsoftened by such a gesture is a vile representative of his fellow men. He brings them only dishonor. Why should this vilest of men live one moment longer? King is getting ready to shoot him on the spot. With these words, the king grasped his bow in the middle and bent it backward, intending to kill the miserable guide. But the bodhisattva, the Guru deer, moved by great compassion, placed himself in front of the man, saying, stop, your majesty. Pray do not strike one already stricken. When he listened to the enticements of his enemy, desire, the guide, at that very moment, at that very instant, he was ruined, his good name lost, his virtue destroyed. This is always very difficult for spiritual aspirants. When you notice your attachment or your anger, delusions arising, if you just follow them, it never leads to anything. It might lead to some short-term, gain. You get the thing that you want to steal. You see something, you get it, but you feel guilty. You get caught later. You certainly create the cause to be harmed as a result of that in the future. His virtue was destroyed at that very instant. Such is the way of the world, like foolish moths drawn to a flickering light. Do you ever see that? You have a candle, or even a light bulb. Moths come. They keep on trying to get in. They even though it's not a fire where they could be burned up immediately, they get dried up very quickly and die. Like foolish moths drawn to a flickering light, people are lured by the prospect of riches. Little by little, the suffering they cannot bear erodes their integrity, until one day they fall, deluded by their desire. Take pity on this man and restrain your anger. Indeed, if you promised him some reward for leading you to me, give it to him. For, look here, I stand with bent head, awaiting your command. Such compassion and sincere desire to benefit the person who had caused him such great harm had a powerful effect on the king. The king's heart was converted, and looking with veneration at the Guru deer, he spoke softly. well said, holy being. In showing such mercy to one whose cruelty against you is so clear, you display true humanity, while we bear but the shape of men. You know, sometimes when people on death row are, or say at the sentencing of someone who's been accused and found guilty of murder, some of the family of the person who was murdered, there are different kinds of people. Most of the time they want to see, quote, justice, you know. I hope he's sentenced to death, or even at the executions, they'll be there happy that he's dying. The rare cases that you hear of that, again, blow your mind, maybe open your heart, are the people that say, you know, please don't sentence him to death, he's experienced enough. It's just happened recently, I think, just recently. So that's what the king was noticing here. Since you deem this knave worthy of your sympathy, and since he has been the cause of my meeting such a virtuous being, I will give him the wealth he so craves. To you, I give permission to roam freely and safely in this kingdom wherever you so desire. The Ruru deer answered, Illustrious king, your royal gift is not offered in vain. I accept. But first, tell me how I may be of service to you that your coming here will become fruitful. In response, the king honored the deer as his teacher and then asked him to mount the royal chariot. Returning to the capital, he gave the deer a reception due an honored guest and invited him to sit on the royal throne. I was trying to imagine that earlier. You know, maybe the deer wasn't standing on the throne, his legs underneath, you know, like the deer is sitting down. There, the king, together with his wives, plural, his officers and attendants, urged the deer to preach the Dharma. That means to teach the spiritual teaching. Preach the Dharma. Gazing upon the creature with reverence and gladness, they asked, people say many different things about the Dharma. You clearly understand it completely. Please explain it to us. The Bodhisattva, raising his voice and speaking distinctly and elegantly with soft words, said to the king and the assembly, the Dharma and all its divisions and subdivisions, all its details, all its rules and precepts can be summed up briefly. Generate compassion for all beings. Abstain from killing, from stealing, and so on, and give pleasure to all. Sort of like the quintessential teaching of all religions. Do you know what compassion means? Do you know, Alice, what compassion means? You have to think about it, huh? Kind of something good, though, right? Is it something? Is something that, or maybe sometimes some people might think of it as a weakness. There's one politician, I won't mention his name, who kind of disdains that kind of, you know, whenever you have an opportunity, you want to, you know, hurt the others or take advantage. Compassion sometimes is seen by people of bad character as a weakness. But to the virtuous, to the religious, to the spiritual, it's seen as a great virtue. Generate compassion for all living beings. Abstain from killing, from stealing, and so on. And so on includes all the other kinds of negative actions, you know, lying, being abusive with your speech, and so forth. Give pleasure to all. Consider, your majesty, the deer is saying, if through such mercy people treated each other as they would treat themselves or their families, whose heart would ever harbor wicked thoughts? If you considered others, you treat them in the same way that you'd like to be treated. What did Christ say? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Many hundred years after the Buddha. You know, Buddhism, the Buddha lived this historical Buddha, and there were many Buddhas in the past, there will be Buddhas again in the future. This Buddha lived some 2,500 years ago, maybe 500 years or so before Christ. There are even legends in India during the years that Christ disappeared between 13 and when did he come back? 36. There's nothing in the Testaments where he was. Some people believe he went to India and actually studied these Bodhisattva teachings. The cause of all disturbances is lack of compassion. Lack of putting yourself in the other person's shoes, wanting them to be free of suffering just as you want to be free of suffering. The cause of all disturbance is lack of compassion. That lack of compassion corrupts the body, speech, and mind. It harms the family no less than strangers. If you lack compassion, it harms your own family because you're not compassionate to them, not only harming strangers where you use harshness and so forth. If those who strive for virtue will only remember compassion, only good can result. Compassion engenders virtue, as a fruitful rain causes crops to grow. So being compassionate helps you to create other virtuous actions. It helps you to be mindful of your actions of body and how you speak and even how you think. It engenders virtue. Once impressed upon the mind, compassion destroys the inclination to harm any other, and the mind, being pure, neither body nor speech can be corrupted. The desire to benefit others increases with pleasure. And from that pleasure, love, charity, patience, and other virtues flow, bringing tranquility and a good reputation. Because of their tranquility, those who are merciful will never arouse suspicion or apprehension in others. Trusted by everyone, they are treated by all as kin, as family. If one's heart is steeped in compassion, no dissension can bring disruption. Even if you're in a group of people and some people are arguing, if your heart is steeped in compassion, no disruption can be generated because of that. If one's heart is strengthened by compassion, the mind enjoys sweet coolness, like a clear pool which no passion can agitate, no fire of anger can destroy. It's an incredible spiritual resource to have that state of mind. Why say more? What need is there to say more? The wise firmly believe that all of virtue is contained in compassion. What virtue is there that is not the consequence of compassion? Always strive to show compassion to every living creature, treating them as if they were your own children, or as if they were yourself. By such pious conduct, you will win the hearts of your people and glorify your royal station. So you get more idea what compassion means. Compassion. Etymologically, you could say, to feel. Passion means to have that feeling with others. In German, I remember I taught a course once in Switzerland where they spoke German. Mitgefühl, I think it is. Do you know German? Is that the right word for?
Yeah, makes sense.
Mitgefühl, something like that. So it means to feel along with others. So compassion means when you see someone who's suffering, because your mind understands what that's like, you feel the desire that they be free of that. You wish that they be free of that. That would be compassion. What's called great compassion. The Indian word for compassion, do you know the Indian word? Karuna. So great compassion is Maha Karuna. It's one of the epithets of Avalokiteshvara, Chatterjee. Mahakurunikaya, the one who's great compassionate one, great compassionate body. Karuna. So great compassion doesn't just feel, oh, it's so suffering. Let's get our food. Let's go to the restaurant. Oh, they shouldn't be suffering. Great compassion is one that one takes the responsibility to alleviate that suffering oneself. Okay? The king praised these words of the wonderful Guru dear, and together with his citizens grew intent on practicing the Dharma, the spiritual teachings. And he granted his protection to every animal and bird throughout the realm. And then afterward, sort of like each of these stories, there are, I can't remember how many in this particular collection. In some of the collection, in a larger collection, there are 108, like the number of beads in the rosary. But here, in this Jataka mala, there are 34 stories. But each one had a little prelude and a little sort of advice at the end, in what situations to apply the story. From the story, one can see how, for the virtuous, no suffering exists except that of others, like it was said at the beginning. For them, their own suffering is like nothing. It's only the suffering of others that is important to them. It is this they cannot bear. They do not mind their own suffering. This story is also to be recounted when praising the qualities of compassion and when showing how the truly virtuous will benefit others, even at their own expense. It also treats of the great harm which comes from harming those who are full of love. From the hand. Praising the qualities of compassion and when showing how the truly virtuous will benefit others even at their own expense. Yeah, nowadays that's not considered, in some political-minded people, that's not considered a virtue. You don't, if what you do would harm you in any way, forget about it. Forget about it. It's like one word. So what do you think? Any thoughts about that? Any observation or question?
So, Venerable, would the deer know everything about how things are going to unfold, what's going to happen, and all of that?
Well, in these stories, they exemplify the Bodhisattva at various stages of his development. Generally, when you had this kind of ability to take rebirth as an animal and have full sort of wisdom of a human, even be able to speak in a human voice, have the karma to be so beautiful and so forth, he was quite a highly realized being. So he may know karmic consequences of future lives already, sort of that kind of clairvoyance. In others of the situations when he's practicing generosity, as a human, the prince, giving away everything, whatever people desired, like kings in India and different countries in the East. Well, not only in the East, many places. There would be a certain day when the population could come and they would ask the king. I think even Saudi Arabia, there was a documentary recently on Saudi Arabia that the people would come and the King Faisal or whatever the king it was would, say, tell the ministers, give this person that, give this person that. So when the Bodhisattva was practicing the perfection of generosity, charity, he was sometimes born as a prince, as a king, and even gave away, in the end, when there was nothing else to give away, he even gave away his own body, to people who were like cannibals, things like that. So these, I did recently, finished about a year ago, I did a retreat, a few years, solitary retreat. in Tibetan Buddhism, they consider a 3-year retreat to be, you know, a good amount. 3 years, 3 months, 3 half cycles of the moon. And during that time, one of the practices every day was to rejoice. It's a virtuous activity that you can do mentally. Do you know what rejoicing means? Alice, do you know? Where did you grow up in the States? Was English your first language, or did you grow up somewhere else? Both?
Second.
Second language. Okay, so you're not so familiar. Scott, what is it? What does rejoicing mean? To rejoice.
Find happiness in something?
Yeah. To rejoice, to feel joy again somehow, like something that was happy event for you to think about it and feel happy about it again afterwards. So if you see someone giving charity, and you think, wow, that's wonderful. Leaving an imprint in your mind that you yourself might be, have the impulse to be generous and give to others. Rejoicing, from a Buddhist perspective, is one of the easiest ways to create virtuous karma. You don't have to actually do a lot of stuff. You could just think of the virtuous deeds, the good deeds that are done by others. These days in the world's a little bit difficult with the political stuff going on. To find examples in the world.
I've experienced, if you have kids, you can actually experience rejoicing when
Yeah.
the kids do something. And it's a pure form of rejoicing there.
Oh.
Yeah.
When you see your kids doing something
Yeah.
just
like-
spontaneous, it's good, and you think, wow.
Yeah,
it's-
some sports or, doing something, excelling in something, you feel like,
Okay,
wow.
yeah, that could be, but I'm thinking to rejoice in someone's like excelling at something isn't necessarily that. Rejoicing means to observe some virtuous action.
That too, yeah.
That's that too, but here rejoicing is limited to that. Just to observe someone excelling, like winning, we beat them, that's not necessarily the same thing. Rejoicing here in something that's virtuous creates the same amount of virtue as that person who did the virtuous action. Say someone has been generous.
Not committed, but
You
accommodated.
rejoice in that. You create. If you're on the same spiritual level as that person, which most of us are, you create the same karma just in having those thoughts that person might have had to endure a lot of effort and resistance to give this away, or to have those resources. If you are of a higher level spiritually than the person, you create almost as much merit as them. Or you create more merit than them if you are a higher level. If you are a lower level, like say, compared to the Bodhisattva, we are lower, most of it, I don't know, maybe you are Bodhisattvas, I don't know. But if we're lower level, rejoicing that you create a fraction of the virtue that they create. So one of the great things when you rejoice, when you try to practice that, is to think of the virtuous activities of the Buddha, like the Jataka tales, when he was a Bodhisattva. And he said, wow, even this person, sort of turned his back on you, you saved their life, and then he sort of like stabbed you in the back by telling the king, where you were, and still you advocated for him, save him, don't kill him, and so forth. The king acceded to that. To think of that, how wonderful it would be if I could do that, in some minor ways this lifetime, rather than responding with, when you've been harmed, rather than responding with harm in return, tit for tat, we say, you
Quid pro quo.
to use a phrase in the quid pro quo, instead of returning harm with more harm, in retaliation, that's usually what people do in the world. That's the ethos of that particular politician I was thinking about now. If anyone hurts him, he hurts them back twice as much, to try to get the aura that no one's, I'm invincible, no one should harm me because I'll go out of my way to harm. That's exactly the wrong way. But instead of acting like that we could be examples for others in the world, that when others harm us, instead of harming them in return, we benefit them. Somehow we work to benefit them. One of my teachers, Tibetan Lama, passed away many years ago. His name was Geshe Repton. When he was a young student at the monastery, one of the things is, he was a good student, and so other students who were not as adept would criticize him. You know how people were out of jealousy, and he went to his teachers and they said, that's very common. Whenever you do well, people out of jealousy will criticize you. Instead of you holding a grudge or harming them back or criticizing them, sometimes if you hear people criticizing you, you may say, they're much worse. You might try to criticize them. So what Geshe Repton would do when he would hear that people were talking about him behind his back, criticizing him, he would invite them for dinner and make this spectacular Tibetan delicacy, steamed dumpling, meat dumpling called momo.
And poison them?
No. He would give them the most delicious, usually the monks didn't have any money at all, and so if they could, on the rare, once every year or every 6 months they would get some extra money, they'd make their favorite. You roll out the dough, take a little bit of meat with spices, seal it up, put it in a steamer, and you'd make this big thing of momo. So he would invite those people that had criticized him for this to repay their harm with kindness. So really recognizing the people who harm you is somehow benefiting you. They've given you the opportunity of practicing patience. Now, I just read one story here. And we're already out of time. To really do justice to this would take, to many of the stories. But if you ever get a chance to read the life stories of the Buddha and to rejoice about them, to feel rejoice, and remember what rejoicing means, not just feeling happy that someone was successful in a mundane, worldly thing, but feeling happy when people are virtuous.
That's a very difficult task.
That is a very difficult task, but and especially in some of these stories, they seem so beyond our ability. Like, wow, if I saved someone's life and they came back and tried to, for their own gain, cause me some harm or cause me death, how could I forgive them? But to imagine that that's possible, and to rejoice and think how wonderful that is. May I be able to do that. May I be able to give all in the future, everything. May I be, observe my actions and restrain from every negativity, as the Bodhisattva did.
You said before you get a portion of the merit. What's the algorithm?
I don't know if there's an equation, but you imagine the distance between you and that spiritual being. If you rejoice, like say you're a little child, or poor person, very meager person. Oh, there are many famous examples. A king was providing a banquet for the Buddha and his disciples. The king actually had the sort of not pure motivation. It was kind of like when you give to the Red Cross to see your name on the list, I gave You know, everyone else sees that I gave the most, or something like that, you know. Or you give money for a school, but you demand that your name is on the building so everyone knows you gave it, you know. So it's mixed with worldly concern. So this king was doing this kind of like to upstage some of the other kings. That he gave this great banquet to the Buddha. Outside the gates, uninvited, they couldn't come in, were two beggars, very poor people, and from the depth of their heart, they rejoiced. Well, let's say one, I don't know if there were two of them. One rejoiced in this thing, not knowing that the king had this ulterior motive, just how wonderful to be able to make offering to the holy beings. How wonderful this is. So at the end of the meal, the tradition was that the people would ask the Buddha to dedicate the merits, sort of pray for who had created all this good karma. Kind of like extra praise, you know, in their eyes, but there's a special meaning to this. And instead of dedicating the merits of the king, the Buddha said, I'm dedicating the merits of the beggar outside. And the king said, well, he didn't give anything. What are you talking about? And the Buddha said, he created, out of belief that you had done this virtuous action, he created incredible, by rejoicing in this, he created incredible merit. You didn't create so much merit, so he could dedicate his merit. Any last thoughts? We reached I think it's 9. We end? Yeah, it is 9. Yeah.
I heard the phrase dharma, or I thought the phrase dharma meant teaching.
It can mean teaching. So dharma can mean the saddharma, the holy dharma, is that which holds you up from suffering. Worldly dharmas are that which we think uphold us from suffering, like possessions and fame and pleasure of the senses. But the real dharma is the actual actions that, you know, the states of mind, the realizations in your mind, the understanding of impermanence and change, the understanding of compassion, and how do you develop those qualities? They're enshrined in various words at this time, sometimes in verbal words that the teachers actually gave, teachings. So those are also called the Dharma because they lead you to that ability to uphold yourself from suffering. We need to rely on words to change ourselves, to be inspired and so forth. So thanks for your attention. Let's spend just a moment, calm our mind again, and rejoice. This evening we've created some virtuous karma by hearing about these teachings, maybe having some moments of joy in the actions of the Buddha, all those various points that were brought out. Whatever virtuous actions I've created mentally this evening by thinking happily about this, may they ripen in such a way that they will perpetuate my spiritual development from week by week, from week to week, to month by month, year by year, life by life. Whatever virtues I've created this evening, may they become the foundation of my spiritual development up to and including my future achievement of enlightenment for the welfare of all beings. How wonderful that would be.